Hi to everyone coming in. It looks like we've got a few people in here so far. Hello, hello. Okay. Good evening and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Oliver from Greenlight Bookstore, and we're thrilled to host tonight's event with Tracey Michae'l Lewis-Giggetts launching her new book, Black Joy, Stories of Resistance, Resilience, and Restoration. She will be talking with Danté Stewart, so you're in for an excellent time. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to Tracey, Dante, and all the team at Gallery Books for making this happen, and to all of you for showing up. Although we're not able to host events in our store spaces, our community of authors and readers is still here. We're grateful for your support and the chance to make space for conversation and connection. Now, just a couple of housekeeping things. In our Zoom webinar tonight, you can see and hear the speakers, but they can't see or hear you. They can see that you're in here though, and there are a couple of different ways you can interact with the authors and with each other throughout tonight's event, and we highly encourage you to do so. The first is the chat, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like one speech balloon. You're welcome to post your comments and thoughts in the chat. That's a great way to show your appreciation for the author and interact with fellow attendees. If you have a specific question you'd like answered by the author, please post that question in the Q&A module. You can find it by clicking on the icon that looks like two speech balloons. We'll be pulling questions only from the Q&A to be answered in the later part of the program. And importantly, tonight's featured book, Black Joy, is available for sale from Greenlight Bookstore. You can shop in person from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. to both our Fulton Street and Flatbush Avenue stores, where you can purchase Tracey's book and many others on site. You can also order online at greenlightbookstore.com for a quick pickup at the store or for shipping anywhere in the U.S. I'll drop the buy link in the chat. If you care about supporting the careers of authors and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores, buying tonight's featured book is a great way to show your support. Our interviewer tonight is Danté Stewart. Danté Stewart is a speaker and writer whose work in the areas of race, religion, and politics has been featured on CNN and in the Washington Post, Christianity Today, Sojourners, The Witness, a Black Christian Collective, Comment, and elsewhere. He received his BA in sociology from Clemson University and is currently studying at the Candler School of Theology at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. He will be speaking with our featured author, Tracey Michae'l Lewis-Giggetts, based in New Jersey. Lewis-Giggetts is the author of 15 books, and her writing has appeared in the Washington Post, Essence, Oprah Daily, and more. Tracey's new book, Black Joy, is a timely collection of deeply personal, uplifting, and powerful essays that celebrate the redemptive strength of Black joy. It was praised by Kirkus Reviews as a loving homage to all members of the African diaspora who strive to preserve their personal joy at all costs, and as a simultaneously gorgeous and heartbreaking read. Tracey is going to start us off with a reading from the book, and then she'll be talking with Dante and with all of you. Please take it away, Tracey and Dante.
Thank you.
Yo, Tracey, what's good?
What's good?
Hey, yo, before we get started, first off, thank you to Greenlight for opening up this space. And then thank you also to all y'all who are showing up, and even to many of you who are going to watch this re-recording. It's going to be an incredible moment. But also, one of my friends said this, you know, we want to make sure we thankful for your bodies being here, but want to make sure we support our writers with your dollars. If we want, you know, us to go far, we want to make sure that we support us right now in this moment. And I'll never forget with me and Tracey, I didn't tell her I was going to tell this, but like I was on Facebook and I realized that Tracey, me and her was friends, or she had followed me or something like that. And then I shot her a little DM. I was like, yo, hey, I look forward to being connected. Like you so cool and things like that. And then she got back to me and things like that. But then she said something that really blessed me. And I never forget it. She said, there's so many writers right now, so many of us are in success. And I'm in a season of success, and I'm here for it. So, Tracey.
Yes.
It's your season. I'm here for it.
Man.
And I'm so thankful to be with you. Go ahead. You're going to do a reading, and then we'll go ahead and get into the conversation.
Okay. First, just thank you. Thank you, Greenlight. Thank you so much, Dante. I have just been, I know this is about Black joy, but if y'all haven't read Shouting in the Fire, like y'all bugging. Go get it, go get it, go get it. I am going to read a little bit from the introduction of Black Joy. Um, I usually don't like to like set up a reading. I just want to dive in, but just to give like a little bit of a gist, I sort of opened the book talking about sitting in my former pastor's office and him stating to me, "You're not very kind to yourself, Tracey." And that
Mm.
began some thoughts and reflections about joy, but also where I believe our joy has to be rooted. So I am going to begin. Plenty are the conversations happening right now about Black joy, the power of it, the necessity of it, the ways in which this very cultural demonstration of humanity counters mainstream narratives of Black life being solely comprised of trauma and hardship. That said, there is an aspect of Black joy that is too often overlooked and or missing from the discourse, mostly because it forces Black people to look inward as opposed to outward for the validation of our joy. In order for Black joy to have longevity, for it to live along for it to live both alongside and beyond our movements, it must be firmly founded in self-compassion and empathy within each individual. No doubt, we Black folks look outside ourselves for that validation for good reason. Historically, we've been dehumanized and dismissed as inferior. So, through our demonstration of joy, we hope to be seen as fully human. We want our laughter to be contagious instead of treated like an audible plague. We want our dances, our food, our stories to be centered and not just commodified or colonized. And yet, the most powerful thing we can do is believe all of this ourselves first, to be absolutely clear about our own humanity, to offer ourselves all the grace and benefits of the doubt that other humans receive. This is self compassion. It requires us to create an infrastructure for the evidence and impact of Black joy in our individual lives that is rock solid before we ever seek external acknowledgement. My inclination that day to push back hard against my pastor's candid words reflected what I already knew about myself. I had a deep desire for validation positioned within a nearly non existent framework of empathy and grace for myself. Even a simple compliment was often hard for me to process. Someone could say to me, "You did a great job," or "I really like that dress you had on," or something as simple as, "I like your hair." And I'd instinctually want to add a caveat to turn that kindness into something I was not worthy of. I'd want to somehow mitigate their compliment just in case something went wrong. My inability to give myself kindness and receive it was an issue of not feeling worthy of it. So even though I hungered for those kindnesses, I had to work really hard to receive them, even for myself. It was a dynamic of longing for validation and wanting to properly process the positivity that came my way, but not being able to take it in. If this showed up in my daily life, how much more would it show up in my work or in the cyber communities where so many of us spend time? I couldn't hold properly the likes and shares I got on social media because was no self love sustaining me. There was no compassion for myself in my journey. And so, inevitably, there was no way to hold any success. But actually, there was. I just couldn't see it. Being a Black woman, I had a portal to self compassion and ultimately joy that I'd yet to recognize. Black joy was ever present, but hidden behind and under the trauma that I wore like a badge. Self compassion for ourselves as individuals creates a collective self compassion that can support the demonstrations of our joy. The historical experience of Black folks in this country made being kind to ourselves a challenge. We did not have time to tend to our emotional and psychological wounds while dodging the master's whip. Extending ourselves grace when we messed up wasn't an option because messing up could have meant lynching or other kinds of harm. Even today, the margin of error is very small for Black people. Benefits of the doubt are rarely extended to us, and therefore we rarely extend them to ourselves. But we must try. We must anchor our joy in self compassion and empathy. Despite what many white people would like to believe, joy absolutely can have a color, a race. Black joy is unique and deeply rooted in the cultural experiences and expressions of Black people across the diaspora. It's ever present and yet often hidden. There is a kind of laughter that only Black people recognize, one that signals more than just a funny thing happened on the way to. A laughter that unearths a salve we need in the midst of reality that on its worst day can be insidiously paralyzing. Black joy has a sound. It moves in a particular way. It tastes like pot liquor and cornbread, but at the same time, shrimp and grits, but also fufu and jollof. And I can't forget pumpkin spice lattes because, of course, we are not all the same. Blackness is not monolithic, but we know it when we see it. Its scent is subtle yet piercing, like great grandmother's talcum powder and Gina Tay. It enters the room before you do and stays long after you leave. This is why we must tap into it. Black joy is also a strategy. The wider world dismisses and disregards it as frivolity at its peril. It is a mechanism for resistance, a method of resilience, and a master plan for restoration. That's what I hope these stories, these essays will unpack. My aim is to make clear how it is the intentional expressions of Black joy, whether subtle or overt, that will ultimately lead to personal and collective healing for Black people, whether we conquer racism or not. I'm desperate for all my people to experience the expansiveness of healing and wholeness available to us. And I think the tool to do that is something we've always had and maybe always known. When joy is Black, it is the radical demonstration of our humanity, our laughter, our ancestral mandate to keep moving in a rhythm all our own, set in a cultural context and struggle specific to our experiences as members of the African diaspora. However, Black joy, without an understanding of empathy and self compassion, is simply Black happiness, and happiness is temporary at best. The words joy and happiness are too often used interchangeably. When we think about happiness, we think about specific moments. That time I rode the roller coaster at Six Flags, that other time I was asked out by my crush. And those are certainly worthy of being called happy moments. Happiness is the feeling in our bodies that permeates everything and tells us that in this moment, I am pleased. I would argue that joy, and Black joy specifically, is different. Our joy and our trauma both sit on a continuum. There isn't one or the other. There isn't a binary. The complexities of our experiences mean that our joy can live just underneath the pain. In fact, it can live alongside it. It's the mother who, after experiencing the pain of childbirth, can look down at the tiny face looking up at her and feel nothing but love. Joy is that thing, as the elders used to say, no white man can steal. It's that sense of hope, the feeling that something good can come out of the bad. It's the good part of the burnt toast. It's the donut tire that lasts longer than it should until you can get a new regular tire. Our ancestors were well versed in Black joy, even when moments of Black happiness escaped them.
My God. Hey, I'm gonna just say, like, when I was finishing this joint on the plane today, like we and I didn't realize I was gonna start here, but I guess this is the best place to start. We both been going through a lot of loss in this moment.
Yeah.
And your book begins with a conversation, and your book ends with this idea of reinvention.
Mm.
So, like, I'm wondering, in the midst of grieving, and as so many people are grieving in this moment, how did Tracey reinvent herself, either writing on Black joy or having to force yourself to be joyful as a Black person?
Ooh, you hit
Let's
me
start
with the
there.
hard questions.
Let's start there. Let's start there.
You know, Dante, I think it's both. And I think it was in the writing of this book, as well as just the overall experience of being a Black woman in this world, right? And yes, I've had some deep, unexpected losses over the last couple of weeks that, has had to live alongside of, hey, I got to go out into the world and talk about joy, right? And how do I do that when I am, even as I'm talking to you, actively grieving? And I think I could not have even fathom doing that had I not gone through the process of writing this book and understanding, researching, observing, reflecting on my own life, just how much generation over generations that is the journey of Black folks, that joy lives in the same container as our grief and our pain. It's not, I'm in grief, I'm pain, this bad thing happened, another unarmed Black man is killed, pandemic, all this stuff that I know people are wrestling with and grieving right now. And then there's joy way over there, right? And I think that the separation is just a perceived separation because there's a lot of other emotions between us and joy. There's anger, there's sorrow, right? All valid, all, righteous anger is a thing. So like all valid emotions, but they're all, so consuming that we can't see joy. It's like so far out there when really all of those things are living together. Our grandmothers and our grandfathers knew, sitting in church, rocking back and forth, they knew how to move the pain of the weak dealing with white folks, how to move it through their bodies in Sunday service, right? The shouting, the like there's things that I began to research and uncover, the hand games that were played on the plantations, right? Could be perceived as frivolity, but it was also touch and intimacy, right? In the midst of this grievous thing that's happening. So I think for me, the writing of this book and the telling of these stories sort of led to me being able to be at least conscious of holding those two things. I don't know if I'm doing it well. I'm a work in progress, but I am doing my best to hold them both.
No, that's good, especially if you're talking about like you being a work in progress. Like I want to take that two ways. One really to focus on like that work in progress, and then the second one going to be thinking about the actual work, particularly the work of, I would even say like you're a theorist of Black joy. You are a theologian of Black joy. You're a preacher, a proclaimer, the very embodiment of Black joy. But first, let's think about like this idea of like growth, and you're trying to figure it out. So like one of the things that I was so struck by in this book was how you wrote about either your own failures of self-love, self-respect, self-embrace, but then also you talked about how others failed you as well.
Yeah.
And I wonder, like, to write a book, to think about resistance and resilience and restoration, especially you thinking about this process of growing. And like I wrote in the margins, I was like, okay, Tracey not only grew older, but you grew up. So how do you think about your work as a writer and the stories that you hold and the ways you're trying to get better? Like, how did like this, like Tracey now at your age, write this type of book that Tracey maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago could not have written?
Yeah, I mean, Tracey for sure, not even 10 years ago. I don't even know if Tracey 7 years ago could have written this book. Definitely not any time before that. When you're talking about that, what comes to mind is I couldn't have written the book because I didn't know what joy felt like. Like and I think when we're talking about Black folks, the diaspora, us as a collective, sometimes it's so easy to move through our lives, dodging, bobbing and weaving, right? That we have moments where, we're joyous, but we don't touch the somatics of that, right? So I had an experience where my therapist said, what does joy feel like to you, Tracey? And I, at my big age of 40 something years old, could not answer that. So I know I couldn't answer that at 25, right? And it was because of those traumas, the acts against me, right? And the choices that I had made that put me in a position where that joy was too far away for me to even know what it felt like in my body. So, you know, a lot of times when I talk about with Black folks, I think it's about returning to the body, right? And how, you know, I feel like I've told this story multiple times, but like, you know, it was sitting in front of a television show and being so excited as a writer to like, you know, see the way that they were unfolding these characters and just the great storytelling that was happening, and I was literally like cheesing in front of the screen, right? And realizing in that moment that, oh, this is, oh, like I have hair standing on my arm, or oh, my chest is, oh, this is what joy feels like. And going back to my therapist and saying, I got it. I got what it feels like. Right? And her saying, okay, so now you have a mental, physiological snapshot of joy that you can call up when you need it. And I was just like, oh, wow. So in the writing of this book and the hard task of telling stories about things that happened to me. I talked about sexual abuse and sexual assault. I've talked about just being Black in corporate America. I talk about being Black in academia. Like I cover a lot of my experiences and holding that truth sacred, right? And making sure that it wasn't about like, let me spill the tea on what this person did to me, but about, you know, my POV and how I move through it. I could not have written that. I could not have the presence of mind to be as to bleed on the page, if you will, like I did, if I did not have any snapshot of joy to reference, right? Because it was part of this writing was a grievous process, right? It was like, you know, how do I say this? You know, and you know, that's, you know, I know we'll probably talk about this, but like that's when I started experimenting with form in some of the pieces. Because I was like, I don't need the straight essay that I would write for Washington Post or something. I need something else to ground these stories. And so I started playing with form because that helped me have an outlet. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think, you know, when I think about like me now and me then, I needed to go through that work. I needed to be, you know, hit a point of severe illness where I was laid out for 8 months, right? To get still enough to even hear what I was supposed to be thinking about, so that by the time I got up and I was reflecting, I could then write about it.
That's good. And especially as you thinking about craft, I thought it was brilliant, like the way you broke up the book. So the book has three movements. It has a movement of, you first lay out this idea of the Blackness of Black joy. And I want to talk about that chapter, Smells of Blackness. We got to talk about that. That might be my favorite chapter of the whole book. But like, you lay this out as, you know, you give us Black joy, you give us the Blackness of that Black joy, and you flesh that out. You put body on it, you put culture on it, you put so much in it. Like as you was going through your writing process, like as you're talking about playing with form, like what type of freedom did you feel as a writer? As you kind of said, okay, I want to talk about resilience, resistance, and restoration. What type of freedom did you feel in that? And how did you approach each one of those? And even in some sense, like was even the writing process, like Black joy is playfulness for you? Like how did you think about crafting this book, and why did you craft it that way? All of that, say that.
Yeah, you know, I had been writing pieces here and there, right? Like the first chapter is actually a revised version of a piece that I did write for the Washington Post. And so I had been touching joy and touching this concept of Black joy for a while before this sort of, you know, opportunity to put it in book form came about. But the one thing I can say is that this book, I felt the most liberated as a writer than I ever had on any book that I've ever written before. It was, I decided that I was going to be free. that I felt like I'm 20 years into this writing game, right? So I felt like I had done enough. I wasn't perfect, but I'd done enough of the craft work that now I'm going to go in and I'm going to tear some stuff apart. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to go in and I am, not going to model myself, my style off anyone else, because I've done that. And, I teach my students, that sometimes that's necessary to try to figure out your voice. But I felt like that I clearly knew what needed to be said and that I clearly understood what my voice was. And it was the most liberating thing that I could have ever done. When I started writing those pieces, I did not have the breaking it out, the movements quite yet. I did not know that. So a lot of those essays, after the fact, we kind of thought about where they fit. Was it more, putting the blackness on Joy, right? Like, was it more about resistance? Was it more about the healing and restoration? Was it more about our bounce back game, right? And resilience. So I kind of did those movements after I had at least written a draft of the pieces that I wanted to go in the book. There were pieces that got cut, right? Like, it's 36 essays. They're short, they're bite-sized. I wanted them because of the topics. I have people now coming to me and saying, I got to take this in doses. I read a couple and I put it down, cry, do what I got to do, because I knew the content would, for some people might be triggering, or for some people might not triggering. I don't know if that's the word I want, but might make them feel some stuff. I knew the chapters needed to be shorter. So, you have these short chunks. But I just play. Smells Like Blackness is like, I gotta read that for like one of my
you got to,
because
that
was one of my favorite pieces to write. Like, I just for some reason just kept thinking about scent, because it's the one thing, like, people can tell you, they think they know what blackness looks like, right? They think they know what it even feels like. But I was like, what's it smell like?
Yeah.
And then the memories, man, like, part of so much of this book was about mining my memories, right? And the memories of going into the salon and smelling, the scent of the hair on the curling irons, and, all of, going into grandmama's house, and, the food, and like everything that was symbolic in our culture, just came to me through scent. And I was like, what would it look like to put that on the page? I've never seen that before. And playing with alliteration and metaphor, and like trying to find alternative words for scent.
Yes.
It was like you said, it was play. Like, that piece especially, I just played. And it broke something, because I think I'd been kind of boxing myself in as an English professor, and like, writing essays for online. And it had been a while since I'd written poetry and fiction. And it's almost like I kind of snuck that back in there, even though it's nonfiction. So yeah, like, I mean, I could talk craft all day, so I don't know how long you want me to go.
No, let's talk. Let's talk craft a little bit, especially like the thematic craft. So like in so much of like public talk of blackness, or literature on blackness, especially thinking about post 2020. 2020 happens. So many black books go on bestseller lists. People consume black literature ad nauseum, and many of these books deserve to be in these places, and many of them deserve to be read widely. But there seemed to be like this overly, like this kind of overconsumption of like thinking about black people and black life, either through death or through pain or through performance. But you craft black life as ordinary and powerful. Why?
because it is.
Facts. But let's get into the nitty-gritty of it. Let's get into let's get into like your crafting of Black life on the page. Like how did you go about approaching Black life and being patient, but also holding Black life in tension, but also making it ordinary and things like that?
You know what? Intention matters across the board. Like what we as writers, what we intend. I know, it's a thing to say, oh, I just, let inspiration hit me, or oh, I have a extreme interest in a topic. I can't even tell you that I could have never foreseen me writing about Black joy 5 or 6, 7 years ago when I was writing about racial reconciliation within the church. Right, like it never would have occurred to me. So I think intention matters. So when I did start writing about joy and I was writing about my experiences, I was very intentional about moving away from all those things that you just said, right? Performance really triggered me right now. Like that's it. Like, the performance of Blackness, the trauma and the hardship and the pain. Again, those stories have to be told, right? But I feel like those stories have to be told and there are other stories to tell. Right? And so what I think my intention is to focus on the daily life of Black folks and to look at it through my lens, to use my stories as an entry point, but also to look across from Georgia, South Carolina to LA to Cape Town to and really, see the ordinary daily joy that shows up, right? And figure out how am I going to weave that experience, not necessarily tell those stories all the time, but weave that that sensation, that tension into the words. And some of it was just being a vessel, if I'm honest. Some of it was Bernice read a piece of mine yesterday, and I was like, "Oh, I wrote that," because I think there were moments in the process of writing this book, and I'm not to get all woo woo with folks, but something else took over. Right. So I can't take credit even for some of what people feel when they read it, except that I arranged the words on the page, right? And I used my skill, whatever skill I might have, to arrange those words on the page. But those words were sourced somewhere else. So when I think about God, when I think about the great cloud of witnesses, my ancestors, they were very much involved in this. Spirit and my ancestors were very much involved in the writing of this, because I feel like, and again, I'm not trying to get all woo woo with folks, but I feel like there was something that needed to be said in the world, something that needed to be heard that maybe had not been emphasized or said, and so at least that's what I tried to do.
No, you did it. I think you've done an incredible job at that, because the thing that's been just captivating my mind lately, especially as I've been reading your book, is you made me pause and slow down and look again at Black life in so many different ways and so many different iterations. I even think about the ways in which the diaspora walks and moves within your page. You have this moment where you say, well, Black people ain't a monolith, but then, there is something distinctively about the Blackness of Black. There is something in the sound, there's something in the smells, there's something in the way we fail, there's something in the way we get better when we do, there's something in the way that we turn things Black. So I want to shift and think about, two experiences in this, and I want to think about turning your faith Black. You start in the church in this conversation with the pastor, we don't got to really talk about the event with the white brother at the publisher house. If we can, I mean, we can talk about that.
We can talk about anything.
Yeah. Because I feel like I do feel like there's something that's just relevant to so many people, you know, because I'm even thinking about so many people who will be listening to this, and maybe somebody would be like me, somebody who is Black and white space. But somebody who is trying to reimagine their faith or like expand their faith. So like you tell this story, you begin with faith, but then also you encounter this white man and his obliviousness, his audacity and things like that. And you also mentioned earlier about how, like, you know, when I was talking about racial reconciliation. So I want to think about like the diaspora, right? And your faith. Like, how did, even when you think about your memory of those experiences, what that dude said and what it did to your body, like, how did the diaspora and Black people turn your faith Black?
Ooh, that's heavy.
Oh, I can ask something else now, but
don't. No, that's good. I know that's good. That's good. So here's the thing. I grew up Black Baptist church, right? Separated from the church briefly in my 20s because my 20s and returned to the church in the intensely evangelical space. And began, as things were happening around Trayvon Martin, and things were being seen in the forefront, because it's always been happening, but like things were being like put on social media, and I was being asked to talk about racial reconciliation. I'd written a book for a smaller independent press called The Integrated Church, and looking at, it's sort of a play on Dr. King's the most segregated hour of the week, right? And examining that. So a lot of people were talking about it, and I was going into these white spaces and I was talking about, very candidly about Blackness and about the necessity for unity and all the kinds of things that come with that racial reconciliation talk. But it got to a point, Dante, I have to be honest, where it felt like, and not too long after this event with this, for those who are watching, I had, I was working at a predominantly white evangelical publishing house, and I was greeting someone, and I said, "Hi, how are you?" And they said, "I'm great, how are you?" And I said, "I'm hanging in there." And the person says, "Well, at least you're not hanging from a noose." And I think that was a turning point for me, because what I began to realize is that, or feel, was that I felt like I was going into these reconciliation spaces pleading my humanity, right? Like it got to the point where it felt like I'm going to stand here and talk to you guys for an hour about why these systems should see me as human. Right? And that didn't sit right with me, right? So I spent some time, I pulled back, lots of prayer, lots of meditation. I began to explore the contemplatives, the desert mothers and fathers, stillness, centering prayer. I began to expand what my ideas were about the faith, right? Then started reading about Black contemplatives, Howard, Thurman, and Barbara Collins, I think is her name, and just started reading, these works that were very different from my upbringing, right? And listening to all the conversations about like deconstruction and what does that look like, and really just feeling like, when you talk about like turning my faith Black, Black, I think it was more about choosing a deeper understanding of what my faith really was, right? As opposed to the stuff that I had been given, this white gaze that was ever present, right? And the white church gaze is even more of a beast, right? And so deciding and choosing for myself that I would no longer be subject to it, right? And deciding that I would embrace all that was Black and all that was my faith, and understand they weren't actually separate, that they were one and the same. And also letting go of some of the respectability politics that came within the Black church, right? The things that were being wielded, most likely, because I have grace for it, right? Like most likely as a way to keep folks safe, but had no longer been, had been then turned into a prison or a cage, right? When I believe that it's about liberation. You write a lot about that, and I appreciate that, because it's about the journey to liberation that is significant to the tenets of our faith, right? And not some of the things that we have been told. So I feel like that's a roundabout. I kind of wandered about to talk about that. And in this book, I try to get there. I try to extend grace for what my faith did for me, challenge the things that I feel like weren't in alignment, right, with ultimately what I feel like God would actually want, and then talk about where I am today with that. And I think today I'm just at the point where my relationship, my spiritual relationship, my relationship lives more in the silences than in the pastor's mouth.
Whew. Wow. That's I mean, that's amazing and brilliant, especially thinking about, the silences. And even I think that makes me think about Audre Lorde when she writes that essay, The Transformation of Silence into Language.
Yes.
And she says at the end that there are so many silences to be broken. And as I think about your book and even the silences, I think about the many ways like silence is about power. Silence is oftentimes about control. Silence is about we don't want to speak on it because we don't want to actually acknowledge just how fragile it is. And I feel like there's so much silence wrapped up into how we think about Black joy, though. So what did you feel was, as you were breaking those silences or the confusion or pushing through how people want to control Black joy or people want to exploit Black joy, what did you find to be the hardest in writing about Black joy, especially in this moment? And how did you work through that in yourself and even with the voices that you called upon that sit upon your shoulder, the likes of Toni Morrison and James Baldwin?
Yeah. The hardest piece of it was those voices. I think I had issues around my worthiness of being able to listen and hear and write. And even beyond, the godmother, Toni Morrison or James Baldwin, or any of, the people that I hold up, Black writers that I hold up. It's my grandmother and my great grandmother, because they were the storytellers too, right? And they were the ones who I talk in the book about my great grandmother putting me in her rocket ship and us time traveling and her taking me to 1910 Alabama, right? Or 1950 Kentucky, right? And her telling me her stories. And so I think the hard part was me feeling confident enough to hear what I needed to say about that, right? Because grief was in the space, right? I had talked about sexual assault and sexual trauma. I had talked about that stuff before. And so a lot of people make the assumption that that would be the things that was harder for me. But I think it was as you mentioned earlier, the ordinary stories that were the most challenging because I wanted to do my best by them. Right. The story of my first love, the story
Mm,
of my, like I said, my great grandmother, my granny, right? And all that she taught me about reinvention and joy and all of those
mhm,
things. Those were the most challenging for me,
mm,
but those are the ones that I think taught me the most and
mhm,
liberated me the most.
mm,
Um Literally when you're reading this book, you are walking through my own soul's liberation.
mm,
And that's hard for me to put out for public consumption,
mm,
right? So that is, I think, another challenging piece of this. Um, but because it is about resistance, resilience, and restoration, that restoration is about healing. And I understand because I am Black
mm,
that it's always where the individual and the collective intersects. So it's not always just about me and my healing. It's about our healing, right? The community. And so um I don't feel like I was sacrificing myself, but I do feel like that there was a greater work that needed to be done. There's a greater healing that needed to be accessed in my stories, just like your stories, right? Just like KSA stories, just like, so and so stories. All of these stories are just the pathway, toward people like finding their own healing and finding their own ways to tell their stories.
mm. That's real. That's good. For those who join, please put your questions in the chat. If you got any questions for Tracey or Black Joy, please, please, please put them in the chat. Tracey, let's think about this.
Mhm.
You write so beautifully about the future.
Hmm.
Um, that is probably my second favorite chapter, about the ways in which Black people invented time travel. And it reminds me so much. I mean, so much. And I text you, and I told you this, like, so much of your writing reminded me of Bell Hooks. Like, I felt Bell like moving
Mhm.
and dancing around the text. Like, I
Ooh.
felt James's spirit. I
Mm.
felt Tony's spirit among the words, among the themes, among the dialogue, among the ideas woven within the details. But then I also particularly think about Tony. She writes this 1974 essay on growing up Black one more time.
Mm.
And so much of it is about returning home.
Hmm.
So, as a writer, what place did both home and the future play in
Mhm.
your narrative of thinking about Black joy? And
Mhm.
even what place does home and the future play into the lives of Black people right now?
Mm. Mm. Such a good question. For me, home was a critical uh part of this writing. It's amazing how things work. In 2016, I took a trip back to my hometown of Louisville, Kentucky, with the idea. I had just begun therapy, so I was going with the idea that I was just going to revisit places in my hometown that informed me, formed me, gave me beauty, but also gave me a lot of pain. And so I would drive around to all of these places and I would just record myself talking about it. And I thought that I was going to be writing something about that. Like I had this whole plan for that, right? But I think what it was is that I needed to do that to return home
Mm,
in order to ready myself for this book, right?
mm,
Because I didn't even like this book wasn't even anywhere on the horizon at that time. I have two pieces in the book called Leaving Louisville, right? And so for me, what Louisville represents, my heart, right? And you gotta understand, like, I am writing about Louisville, my time there, the beauty, the pain associated at the same time that Breonna Taylor in Louisville is killed, murdered, right? At the same time that I'm listening to them tell me that they're not going to prosecute these people for her murder, right? Like, I am wrestling with all that Louisville is to me. My love, my family is there, my mom is there, like my, all that I love and all that frustrates me at the same time. All the things that sent me on that in that budget van with $300 in my pocket to Chicago, and then from Chicago to New York, and then from New York to Philly, right? Like, place and finding my place. And I think, my experience, my migration, right, is almost like a micro, of the Great Migration, right? Only that migration was so much rooted in like internal stuff. But I was in a lot of ways running from terror, in a lot of the same ways, right? Whether that terror was a terror manufactured in my own mind or a real and present danger, whatever it was, in very same ways as my ancestors was leaving for the perception of a better life. Now, the North showed me a thing or two, and I talk about that, right? Like, showed me that it's two sides of the same coin, right? Like, it may look different, feel different, but it's still here, And so, when you talk about place for Black folks and then for Tracey, it's very much like one thing is a lens into the other. Like, my personal journey was a way for me to see, oh, so when great grandmama was telling me about taking me on that time traveling trip in the 80s and taking me back to the post Reconstruction, early Jim Crow, right? And telling me those stories, it was aligning with my own heart and the things that I was dealing and the reason why I left and all of those kinds of things. So it was a real, like I said, it was something I'm still, I love that you're asking me these questions because it's forcing me to actually really articulate and think about what was happening while I was writing. So thank you for that. But like, it certainly was my personal, great migration story that was intersecting with the story of Black folks in this country.
Brilliant, beautiful, brilliant, beautiful. So we got some questions in the chat. So Paulette asks, did you, and thank y'all for asking your questions. If you got multiple questions, you can throw them in there. Yeah, multiple questions. We got about a good 7 minutes left. So we want to hit on these questions. Paulette asks, did you struggle with how much to tell / expose of yourself to us?
I did. Thank you for the question, Paulette. I did. But see, that question kind of can live even in the craft conversation because most writing is rewriting, right? So what I chose to do was to put it down raw and put it down as it came to me, and then make decisions in the editing and rewriting process as to how I would frame a particular story, right? So I decided to talk about my sexual abuse in the context of like poetry, almost like in a very lyrical way, was a way for me to still tell it, but to do it in such a way where the emphasis is on what I learned, what I retained, how I was able to heal, right? As opposed to, like I said, dropping tea. That was never going to be my intention. So yeah, it was very, very challenging for me. I, even, family members, I had to say, giving you a heads up. You're going to learn things about me that you don't know. right? And that's got to be okay,
Mm.
because the truth is sacred and intention matters. And I know what my intentions were in writing. And so, yeah, it was hard, but it was necessary.
That's good. It reminds me so much of Elizabeth Alexander. She writes in the Black Interior that this. I'm the writer, and I let everybody else deal with it as they deal with it when they go out in the world. I
Mm.
think, that takes a lot of courage too, though. So,
Mm-hmm.
it takes a lot of courage and fortitude. It takes a lot of resilience, but then also, like, it takes you enough healing and distance to be able to
Mm.
talk about something without being broken again by it.
Yes.
Like, because I think about trauma, and I think about bitterness. And this goes into the next question from Jessica. Like, I feel like bitterness happens when we're constantly reminded of, where we're constantly reminded of like what others did to us, and we
Mm-hmm.
have no alternative story or place to take it.
Mm.
So we're just reminded again and again and again. So if you were in the white evangelical space and publishing house, then that just would remind you again and again and again, but you're beyond that space. So therefore you got enough distance and you can courageously talk about it. So
Mm-hmm.
Jessica says, I find that people have held on to grief so tightly
Mm-hmm.
that when joy is experienced, fear and resentment of joy is also experienced.
Mm-hmm.
So Jessica wonders, do you have any advice for overcoming resenting joy, but not just
Mm.
any joy, but Black joy especially?
Ooh, great question. Thank you, Jessica. I think I can answer that and speak to what you just said. Um, Brene Brown talks about this concept of foreboding joy, where when you're in the midst of experiencing joy, you can't fully engage it, you can't embrace it because you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. And I
Mhm.
think that when you talk about Black joy, I think that's the story of our joy, right? Like sometimes, it's this idea of um always waiting, like, can we really rejoice in this election? Can we really, rejoice in this particular moment? You know what I'm saying? Because something's gonna come back and steal it from us, right? And so, this idea that we resent joy, like I've gone through experiences in my life where pain and trauma and grief were so incredibly comfortable and familiar for me that joy, I had a physical negative reaction to joy.
Mm.
Like, and the same thing with rest, because I love the Nat Bishop and her work around rest and the decolonization of it and your mind around rest. But like, I could not even rest and relax because my body, because of PTSD and everything, would react negatively. It would always be on guard. It was always in fight mode. It was always in this space of, we've got to be safe. So when you ask me like any advice about that, some of the work that I've done in therapy, my therapist uses this language of like looking at our lives and our journey as a bus with a bunch of people on it. And those
Mm.
people are the different iterations of ourselves um across our lifetime, right? And it's an internal family systems theory that looks at, I have an 8-year-old on my bus, right? Who needs a particular kind of safety, right?
Mm.
And if I am at 46 years old experiencing something, sometimes the 8-year-old will get in that driver's seat and she will start to drive that thing because she feels like, you know, this I got to keep us safe. She's only 8 though, right? But she's trying to keep me safe in that moment, so she will show up. And so I think part of dealing with the resentment that can come with joy or the resistance to joy, because we're living in that grief and we're holding on so tight, is recognizing who is driving our bus. Like
Mm.
who's in the driver's seat right now? Is it,
Mm.
20-year-old you who had a really negative or terrible experience and they're stepping up because they're saying, wait a minute, now this reminds us of that thing that happened 20 years ago, right? So we got to implement these safety measures, but those safety measures don't work for me at 46. You know, they worked at 20, and that's the reason why we don't kick them off the bus, because these are parts of us and we need to love them, and we need to, you know, extend grace to them, and we need to say thank you for your service, because when I was 8 I needed you, and when I was 20 I needed you, right? But at 46 I have the benefit of the knowledge that you, in wisdom, that all of you gave me, but now I can make the choices based on today and not yesterday. So I think, Jessica, you know, when you're in the midst of experiencing a joy moment, it's about being present, right? And sitting in that moment and saying, who's showing up that's trying to make me think that this is a bad thing? Or who's showing up that's making me think that, you know, the next time I turn on a TV is going to be somebody shot. And even if that is the case, because we know where we live and who, you know, what we're dealing with, right? How am I letting that future thing steal from my present? And see, grandmama and them understood that. Like, they understood, like a lot of our ancestors understood that if you had a joy moment, you held on to the joy. And we didn't let the future trauma that was inevitably coming steal from the moment. Right. And I think somewhere along the line, some of us have kind of flipped that. Right. So, I mean, that's the best way I can answer that.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. So let's end on this note. Thank y'all for your questions. And thank you, Tracey, just for, number one, the brilliance of your book, the just the craft as a writer, the love that walks up and down the page, the vulnerability, the honesty, the witnessing, the bringing the voices of so many people along with you, from the epigraphs of each chapter to these pausing moments that are in chapters where you're introducing us to other almost like vessels of Black joy. So thank you for that. And I want to end this night on here. Back in the future. Let's go back to the future. The year is 2064. And Black joy is in the future, and somebody picks it up, but it only has one chapter. What chapter do you want them to have?
Oh, you gonna do me dirty at the end, right? Go, just do me dirty. Ooh.
Hey, I look creative. I look creative.
I love it. I love it. I just love it if it was directed to somebody else. Gosh, Dante, I don't know, because I feel like this is like a symphony, and that's like asking, like, which instrument are you going to hear? Are you going to just hear the clarinets? You're going to hear the violins, right? Like, nah, you need the whole symphony to like do that. I mean, you know, I mean, what freedom looks like on her. I think the last chapter, the time travel chapter, I might choose that also. I don't know. Those are the two that come to mind, though, that I might choose. But it's a symphony, so
it is though, and I think that's the brilliance of your book. Your book hold this idea of Black joy up, and in so many ways, and it really is melodic. I mean, it is a song. It is a love song to all of us. It is a love song to our children. It is a love song to our ancestors. And I think, for real, it's a book, especially in this moment of life, of grief, of struggle, of so much going on in the world. I think it is a book that so many of us need. So all of y'all who are here today, tonight that is, or whenever you look back at this re-recording, make sure you purchase your copy of Black Joy, Stories of Resistance, Resilience, and Restoration. You will not be mad or regret getting this book, because this book is packed with so much brilliance, beauty, and creativity. To those who attend, thank you so much. To Greenlight, who hosted this incredible event, thank you. But most of all, to the woman of the hour, Tracey,
Thank you.
thank you so much for loving us through this
Mhm.
book. That is the very embodiment of Black joy.
Thank you. Thank you, Dante, for just challenging me, pushing me. I just appreciate you so much. Thank you.
For sure, for sure. I think, are we gonna hand it back over to Greenlight, or
I don't know.
I think they got disconnected.
Yeah, I think so.
I think
So I
so.
guess
I don't know.
I guess we end it
I
and
guess we
see what happens.
can. Let's end it. All right,
Okay.
Tracey. You have a wonderful
Take care.
Take care. All right.